wanted to show you how to integrate Mastercard payment gateway services into your website for collecting payments. So I wanted to go through the MPGS documentation first. So in Mastercard supports different integration modes to for collecting payments. So we have the hosted checkout, we have hosted session, we have direct payment. So hosted checkout is a flow where the payment form is securely hosted and rendered by the Mastercard servers within your website. Hosted session is similar, it's just that it gives you more customizations. And direct payment is a flow where the payment form is rendered completely within your website and you are responsible for the PCI DSS compliance. And so in hosted checkout, the merchant doesn't have to be PCI DSS compliant because the payment form and the card details being inputted are directly inputted on the page rendered by Mastercard. So the merchants don't fall under the PCI DSS scope. But in direct payment, the merchant has to be PCI DSS compliant because the card details are essentially being inputted into their client website. So I just want to show you a high level flow of how this looks like. So this is the high level flow. We have the client, we have the server, and we have the MPGS gateway. So let's assume that the client is an e-commerce website, and we have finally reached the checkout page to pay. So when the client website clicks on proceed, and this is your server, we fire an internal API call which internally calls the MPGS create session. So this is where we are passing the order details like amount, a unique order ID, a redirect URL to which after the payment is done to redirect to, so that these details, and MPGS will create a session out of this. So it will give us a session ID. This session ID is then passed from your server to your front end, and in your front end you are loading the MPGS JavaScript library with the session ID. This will render the payment form in your client website. So you have two flows to render the payment form, either an embedded flow or a redirect flow. So embedded flow is where you render the payment form in your client website itself. So within an iframe, it is rendered in your website itself. So the customer doesn't have to leave your website. The redirect is where it gets redirected to the MPGS URL, does the payment, and comes back. The next is the customer inputs the card details, and then they go through the 3DS authentication flow. So this 3DS authentication flow is determined by the issuing bank, and it could be either be a bank OTP page, or it could be an verification on the digital banking application. 3DS authentication has two flows. One is a frictionless flow and the challenge flow, which I will get into detail. And once that 3DS flow is done, then it gets redirected to the redirect URL, return URL, which I mentioned while creating the session. So after this, I have to verify the payment has been completed. So I need to call MPGS retrieve order API to check if the status captured is there. So that is the end state of the transaction. So I fire another API request from my client to my server, which internally calls the MPGS create order. And I can see that the MPGS create order gives me status captured. So then I propagate this to my front end and I display the success result. So this is the high level flow on how the hosted checkout flow works. So as I told you, the first thing is you have to establish a session. Now, how do you establish a session? You have to first trigger an API request from your server to the Mastercard payment gateway endpoint. So this API has to be fired from your server. It cannot be done from your client due to security reasons. So this is the curl of initiate checkout. So you can see that we are passing basic authentication. The API operation is initiate checkout. Now we have an interaction node and an order node. So interaction node, we have the operation authorize, and then merchant details, and order is where you have the currency, amount, ID, and description. So this is a unique ID. This is where you will put the amount and the currency. Now I'll just go through the API specification. So this is the interaction operation which I was talking to you about. So what does authorize mean? So authorize means that you are putting a hold on the funds from the issuing bank. Now when you do a purchase operation, both authorization and capture happen together. So you are putting a hold on the funds from the issuing bank, as well as doing the transfer from the issuing bank to the merchant bank account. So an end state for a transaction is always an auth and capture. So that's why you can do a purchase transaction. Purchase transaction facilitates authorization and capture together in one transaction. So if you have a use case for delayed capture, that's where you will use this authorize operation. So you can authorize the funds, and then whenever the goods are available, you can capture the funds and deliver it to the customer. So I will just show you this in my backend. So my backend, I've done this API call in my backend, for which I'm using a Spring Boot application. So this is my API. So we have the payment slash checkout. So this is the API that will be triggered from the client, and this will call the initiate checkout. This will call the MPGS API. Now the API operation is initiate checkout. The operation is purchase. This is a return URL I was talking to you about. Merchant details, the amount, currency, unique order ID, and then using this I'm building an MPGS request, and then I'm initiating an API, a network request to the MPGS servers. So you can see REST applet.exchange. This is where I'm making the API call and I get the response. So let me show you a demo of this. So here I'm going to click on proceed to payment. So this is where it will, from my client website, it will call my API, where within my API it is making a network request to MPGS server to create the session. And once that session ID is returned, I am using the session ID in my front end to render the Mastercard payment gateway form. As you can see, the Mastercard payment gateway form is being rendered. So this is where we need to input the card details. So before I get into that, I'll just show you what happens within that flow. So once I get the session ID, then I have to call the Mastercard payment gateway JavaScript library and pass the session ID. So as I mentioned to you, you have two options for implementing the hosted payment page. The embedded page is a component that is activated within your website's existing page. A payment page is a separate page to which the payer is redirected. So you have to first create the checkout object. For that, you need to initialize the script. You can pass an error callback and a cancel callback. Then you're configuring the checkout object. You get the session ID which was returned from your server, and you pass it over here, and this will render the payment form. So you can do the embedded approach or the redirect approach. So just to show you that in the code, you can see that I have this use effect where I'm creating a script, and then I'm appending it to my DOM, and I also have the use effect where I have the session data which I got from my backend. So you can see this handle checkout is the function that is triggered when I click on proceed. So this will first call my API. So this is where I generate a session, and that session is then saved in my store. So you can see I'm saving it in my store as session data, and then that session data dot session dot id is the session ID which I'm passing into this checkout.configure. So, and I'm going to show the embedded approach. So the moment I do window.checkout.show embedded approach, this payment form is rendered. So you can get the test card details from Mastercard documentation. So I have a test card with me. I will do a payment with it. So this billing address is something you can actually hide while creating the session. So there is option ways to hide this also. Here I'm just going to show it. So I am putting in the test card details and the billing address, and then this is finally where I do my payment. So as you can see, it has gone to the 3DS authentication page. So this is a test environment, that's why you're seeing this simulation. So I just wanted to show you more about the 3DS authentication flow. So what is 3DS authentication? 3DS authentication is an additional layer of security to online purchases by requiring the cardholders to authenticate themselves with the card issuer. So the 3DS authentication comes from the issuing bank. They are the ones responsible for this. So we have two flows in this. One is the challenge flow and the frictionless flow. Challenge flow is where the payer is redirected to a OTP page, and is required to respond to a challenge to identify themselves. Now frictionless flow is basically you don't respond to a challenge because the ACS seems the payer as low risk. Now what is ACS? ACS is access control server. This is a component within the issuer domain which verifies whether authentication is available for a card number and device types, and authenticates specific transactions. So once I do the 3 days authentication, this is when it gets redirected back to my return URL, which I mentioned while creating. So as you can see, the payment is successful. It gets redirected to my return URL, which I mentioned while creating the session. So a couple of things are happening over here. So once it gets redirected to my return URL, I am calling. So let me show you that. So I get the order ID from the return URL, and with this return URL, I am actually calling an API request to, as I previously told you, you need to confirm if the payment actually has been captured. So I'm making an internal API call to my backend server, which is calling the MPGS retrieve order to check if the status is captured. So this is that API. Only once we confirm the status is captured, we have to show the payment success screen. So I make this API call, get order, and this calls the MPGS get order. Let me show you if I can. Yeah, so you can see that the my get order fires from my backend, and it calls MPGS server, and I get status captured. The total authorized amount is 300 and the total captured amount is 300. So this is the API I was talking to you about, which is the order ID API, which is fired right now. And this again calls the Mastercard retrieve order API, and I get this response that it is successfully captured. So once I confirm it is captured, then I show the payment success screen to the customer. So which is what is happening over here. So the API call is fired, and I get the order details. See, you can see the success is basically if the result is success and the status is captured. So based on this, I show the payment success screen. So you can see I'm passing the order ID, the amount, and the status captured, and the date, description, and card. So this is the end state. Now we have this section for subsequent operation. So I have used a purchase operation. So my transaction is in the end state. So had you used an authorized transaction, you have to finish that authorized transaction by calling a capture API. So that is when the transaction is in the end state, because authorized transaction only puts a hold on the funds from the issuing bank, but only when you call the captured API, the settlement cycle starts, from the issuing bank to the acquiring bank. That's the end-to-end flow. Thank you guys.